Welcome to Chapter 9. Chapter 9, we're going to actually process payroll. Chapter 8, we spent our time setting up payroll so that we could process, but now the fun begins. We're going to actually process payroll, and we're going to track payroll information for our company's employees. So we established a file for each employee, and then we're going to process the payroll transactions. And these employees are found in the Employee Center. And the Employee Center is a module here on the home page. When we go in there, we have 2 employees. Now in the real world, typically we have more than 2 employees, but this is just good for practice. So every time that we process payroll for our employees in our activities window here, QuickBooks then automatically updates the information in the Employee Center. You can see here right now that if we look at each employee, and I'm just going to run it for all dates. Let me just pick on Richard here, run it for all. We've got a couple of paychecks that we're going to run for each employee. So that information is automatically updated in the windows, and we're going to go through that together. And we're going to use our Kristen Rena Designs file to run payroll. So let's talk a little bit about payroll, whether we're using a manual system or we're using QuickBooks. In a manual payroll system, we're going to use a payroll journal register, and then we're going to calculate the employee's gross pay. So if we just look at this check here, and I double click on this to look at the detail, I can actually get in here and click on the paycheck detail, and let's talk about this a little bit. So in our paycheck detail in here, we've got the employees, their gross pay, their hourly wages, how many hours that they worked, and then we get their actual gross wages for the period. And then, of course, we have to take out federal tax, Social Security, Medicare, their state withholding, and then the company has their share. Social Security they have to match, Medicare they have to match, they have to pay federal unemployment, the employee does not. And then they also have state unemployment that they have to pay as well. So employees are expensive, as I had discussed back in Chapter 8. So in QuickBooks, our Employee Center, as you can see, contains all this background information. Doing payroll as a manual process is just too time intensive and too many chances of making errors, especially because, what if an employee changes their withholding? That means that their taxable amount may change. What if we miss that? Their paycheck's going to be wrong. The nice thing is that at least with QuickBooks, the rates are already in there, and all we have to do is, well, it's always a good idea to test it, look it up on the tax table, make sure it's correct. But the nice thing is that our chances of making mistakes are much lower. So when we process payroll information, that information is going to show up in our pay employee window. Right now I'm looking at the detail. If I get out of here and I go back into, I'm going to close that, I'm going to go back into my employees area. This lists again the check amounts and the detail for each check, which is nice. And whether we use both a manual or a computerized system, we then have payroll reports that are generated and then have to go to whether it's federal or state tax authorities. So focusing on employee information, I want to get into talking about how to add an employee, how to edit employee information, and we can do all of that here in the employee module in QuickBooks. So let's pick on Harry here for a second, and let's go under Manage Employee Information, and I can actually use my right-click button as well, just right-click and do Edit Employee. All kinds of information out here for Harry. We have his name, Social Security number, obviously these are fake numbers, and really important when we do print out reports out of payroll, we want to definitely mask the Social Security number where it will put little X's in, because again, our Social Security numbers are just way too exposed already with identity theft problems. Here is his date of birth. You can put down whether he's married or single. I'm just going to say single. And then it even gets down into EEOC information that does also need to be reported for employers, where you have to say, are they a citizen? What's their ethnicity? I'm not going to get into all that. Whether they're disabled, their I-9, are they military? And again, this is all for reporting purposes, and it's information that our government does collect. Also out there is address and contact information. So this is where you can put in their address. If an employee has an address change, you can put in their phone number. Really nice is there's an emergency contact info information here if something was to happen. Under additional information, this is where you have an account number or an employee ID, which is fantastic. So instead of identifying people with just their social security number, you can actually go in and say, okay, here is this employee's ID number. He's employee number 1. So I'm going to go ahead in this field and put in employee number 1, which is really great. There's also billing rates, depending upon, maybe this is like a lawyers, or this is, in this case, it's interior design company. So they may have different billing rates if it's the owner or if it's one of the employees. So you can set those up. Custom fields, this is really cool. You can actually track other things. For example, define fields, and you can put anything you want in here. You could put in, for example, we already are storing his birthday, but maybe you wanted to put in his wife's birthday. So you could put in partner birthday, something like that, okay? And then you can say, okay, where do I want this to be seen? And I'm going to say in the employee area, click on OK, and now that actually shows up, and you can enter in text in there. So it's really cool, and you can actually track other random information about your employees that you may want to consider. Under payroll information, this is where we're going to find out how often that they're paid. We don't have a payroll schedule going on, meaning are they semi-monthly, are they bi-weekly, whatever the case is, but that's where you would set that up. Under earnings, this person is salary, and our 2 options are salary or hourly. We set up that in the last chapter. So he is salary, and his annual rate is $24,000. If he were to get a raise and we wanted to bump up his pay, we would then, maybe he got a nice raise and now he's at $29,000. That's where you would make that change, okay? Then we have other additions, deductions, company contributions. So if there's something else out there besides tax or something special that has to come out, that would go in here as well. The tax information, there's a separate area just for tax though. So this is actually for example, if there was like a pension or something like that, that would go out there. Under taxes though, this is where we're going to say, okay, this is where he's single. Here's the allowances, which items that they pay. And remember, we spent a lot of time on this in the payroll setup from the last chapter. This is the federal information. Here is the state, again, whether they're, single, married, how many allowances. And then there's an other for, they just have Medicare in here. I'm just going to click on OK. I'm just going to ignore this. So also out there is sick and vacation. And this is really nice because you can actually track an employee's sick and vacation time. And there's actually an appendix which you guys are going to do where you're going to go into more detail about tracking sick and vacation time, which is really nice. The thing that you need to understand is that some companies have a policy where, you use it or you lose it. Meaning, we're going to reset those hours each new year. So at the beginning of the year, maybe he was to get 40 hours at the beginning of the year, okay? And if he did not take all those, guess what? It resets. You use it or you lose it. Now, if you can roll it over, you obviously wouldn't check that. So that's sick time. That's vacation time. Every company is different. A lot of companies now are just giving you what's called personal time off. They don't care whether it's sick or vacation, but that's your time. So again, you can track this really easily within QuickBooks so that you can stay on the same page with your employees. Also out here is direct deposit. Now, we're using the manual version. So, of course, when I go out here, it's going to ask me to subscribe to payroll, which we're not going to do because we're doing it as a manual process. But direct deposit, really nice feature. You can put in the routing number and the account number and then deposit funds into your employee's account. So much better than, dealing with checks and they get lost and whatever the case. So really, really awesome. The last tab is about employment information, and this is where you're going to put in their hire date, their release date when you let them go, or they let themselves go, or they quit. What type of employee that they are, whether they're full-time or part-time. Then there's other things in here. Exempt. I'm not going to get into all the rules with this, whether they're exempt or not exempt. And then their job details. What do they do? Their department, etc. If they had a leave of absence for, maybe there was a child that was born, whatever, family leave, whatever it may be, this is where you can enter in this information. If there was a termination, this is where you can put in the termination dates, whether you recommend them for rehire, lots of data in here, whether a severance was paid, and then you can put in notes. Once an employee does become termed, we don't want to delete them, meaning they're not employed. You want to make them inactive, because guess what? If an employee works from January through June, they quit in June, you can't just delete them. It's not like they disappear. You have to keep those payroll records on file for at least 7 years, and you're still going to have to do give them a W-2 and do your quarterly returns, your yearly returns. So it's not over. So I showed you how to edit an employee. If you want to go in and add a new employee, you just click on New Employee, and then you would fill out that same information that I had just gone through. So it's a pretty easy process. Again, very repetitive, but it's nice to know that at any time you can go in, you can edit the employee. Again, we don't want to delete the employee. It's always a better idea if they have termed to make them inactive. All right, so let's actually go in and let's pay an employee, or we can actually pay both of our employees. I'm going to get out of this employee window here, and I'm going to go down, and I'm going to go and click on Pay Employees. Not many options down here under Employees. Basically, pay your employees, pay the liabilities. We're not turning on payroll. If you click on this, they're again going to want you to subscribe to their QuickBooks payroll services. We don't want to do that. Over here is some, tracking or online tools that you can give to your employees. Again, if you pay for the QuickBooks service, can't really show that to you because we're doing a manual process. So we're going to focus on these two things right here. So pay employees, you're going to click on the icon to pay your employees, and then you're going to pick which employees that you're going to pay. Now, I'm getting a message that there's another paycheck. I know that, so I'm just going to ignore that. And you can see that this person, Harry Renee, remember that he's salary. So for him, he doesn't have any hourly wages. I get that question a lot. Richard is hourly, so he has 88 hours, and we have that information filled out. All right, so let's look at some of our options here to pay our employees. We have up here, when our pay period ends, we have our check date, and we have our bank account. Very common mistake that students make in this area is they choose cash operating. No, it has to be under payroll. If you don't do that, when you run your reports, guess what? You're not going to see those entries for payroll because they're in the cash operating, not in payroll. So do not fall into that trap, okay? I'm not going to change my dates up here. I'm not going to follow along exactly like the book. I just want to show you the process, okay? So I am going through checking these. There's a couple different check options. I'm just going to assign check numbers here. We clicked on both of our employees, and then I'm going to click on continue. All right. Now you can see Harry, his salary is $24,000 a year. Well, that means that he's paid every other week $1,000, which makes sense. Okay, or semi-monthly, 24,000 divided by 12. Okay, so and that's 2 times a month. So his gross pay is $1,000, and then Richard Henderson, he's hourly. His gross pay is $1,760. Okay. Now, so far right now, we just have their net pay. We don't have the tax and stuff created or entered in here yet. So I'm going to click on Create Paychecks. That's the next step. And it says, do you want to print your paycheck stubs or distribute to employees? Now, if you do pay stubs and you click on that, that means that they have direct deposit. Again, we're manual. I'm not going to click on that because we're not going to give them pay stubs. We're actually going to give them paychecks. Of course, these are not real. Okay, so click on paychecks, and again, mine are not showing up just because I actually already printed them. But basically what happens is I created the paychecks, click on close. Okay, if I go back into my employee information out here, you're going to see that, guess what? Aha, there's another check out here, this one in November. Okay, and if I double click on this, I'm going to go in here and go into my paycheck detail. Okay, now one major problem here is that there's no tax liability here showing up. So What needs to happen is that my taxes are not set up correctly. Now, it's okay that this is wrong. We know that it's wrong. In a perfect world, we would get a $1,000 paycheck and then not have to pay any taxes. However, that is not the case, okay? What you have to do, because this is manual payroll, we have to go in and we're going to unlock the net pay. Because if you leave this locked here, this little button locked, that means that you cannot change any of these numbers, okay? See how I get a net pay locked message here? So what we have to do is we have to unlock the net pay and click on OK. And then we have to manually put in how much all the taxes are. Does that make sense? So you're going to go through and manually enter in that information, okay? Then once you do that, you're going to click on OK. And then if you go back into the paycheck detail, you can see that those changes were made. So you're going to have to go in and manually put in the information for both the employee and for the company. And now you can see that his actual check amount has changed quite significantly, okay? Obviously my numbers were not correct, but just to show you how you go ahead and do that, again, it's unlock net pay, click on OK, make your changes manually, and then click OK. So the next part in your book talks about correcting an error in a paycheck. This one is messed up, and that's because I wasn't following along with what the book wanted me to do. How do I fix this? Again, you would go in. Let me actually go back a screen. All right, so let's go into this check here, and we're like, you know what? This check is not correct. This check shouldn't have even been cut. This is a total mistake. What you should do is you should click on this, go into this check, and you have some options. Up under Edit, you can actually void the paycheck. So if you want to get rid of it altogether, just click on Void, or you can click on Delete. Remember, even though you click on Delete, there is still an audit trail in QuickBooks. So if you think that if you hit Delete, no one will ever know, they do. Okay, there's an audit trail. If you click on Void, that's the better process. You would then clear it out. Or if you wanted to edit the paycheck, again, you go into that paycheck detail and make the change as you need to. So for example, maybe this should have been $9.60 or something like that, okay? Not $960. I'm going to unlock net pay. Let me change that again. Oops. Change that number. Okay. Then click OK. And that has significantly changed his paycheck, as you can see. All right, so you can edit it, or we can go in and just say, you know what, I'm going to completely void that paycheck. Click on Save and Close. Yes, if I go back in now and look at Harry, his information, you can see that his check has been voided. It says void right here. All right, the last part we're going to talk about, second to last, is paying our liabilities. So I'm going to close out of our window, and I'm going to go into our Pay Liabilities area. All right, so I'm going to actually put in from 2015 through 2017 and click on OK. And as you can see, I don't really own any liabilities. Remember, I didn't have any tax information in there. But let's say that, because I voided that check. Let's say, though, that we have entities, whether it's the Minnesota Department of Revenue or the federal government, that we're going to pay. And what you would do then is check off those items that you're going to pay and then click on Create. Again, we want to make sure it's out of the payroll account, the check date, who it's payable to, and you can actually set it up so that the checks are to be printed, and then you can actually go in and print them in quotes, right? So really watch your dates, but the really cool thing is that you'll actually get in here the amount to pay, and then when you click on Create, what's great is that it'll actually go in and do the check. So I'm going to actually go into the register here. I used Control R, not the operating, but the payroll account, and I'm going to actually show you my liability check. So here it is for the United States Treasury. Here's my check that was already done from the payroll that you'll go through when you do the textbook review. So when you create those liability checks, it's awesome. It actually links to the United States Treasury, who is a vendor, and then it puts in the amount, the period, and then it does a complete and total breakdown for you. It's super awesome. You can see also, if I go back, here's the Minnesota Department of Revenue liability check once you create those. Now, if your liability checks are off, that means that something's wrong or something was miskeyed in your payroll, your paychecks that were done. So you'd have to do that where I went in and unlocked the net pay, modify the paycheck, and then rerun your reports. Okay, so that is how you go in and pay your liabilities. Some of the reports that we're going to focus on are specifically your, gross pay, your employer payroll taxes, your withholdings, and then I'm going to actually show you a 941 here in a little bit. But let's look at some of our basic reports for this chapter under employees and payroll. So we can see what's called a payroll summary, and this shows us, from our dates. Let's actually change that so we get a little bit more detail. There we go. Let's change our dates. So we have our gross pay, and this is for Harry, and then you can see Richard is right here, and then we have a total over here on the right-hand side for both of our employees. And what's great is that you can use Quick Zoom, and for example, if their gross pay, the $2,000, you can actually double-click on that, and that will take you into their paycheck, their transactions by payroll. And then if you double click on it again, it'll actually take you to their payroll check. So it's super, super easy to navigate in here. So that's the payroll summary. Another report that's important would be your payroll item detail. And this shows you for each employee what their salary, their hours, their federal tax, their every item that's on their paycheck. It'll show you the detail. We also have out there the employee earnings summary, and this shows you for each employee what their earnings were for the period. I'm actually going to change the date here. All right, so you can see here from our dates here, we've got Harry's total salary, we've got Richard's hourly amount, and then how much they've paid for federal, Medicare, Social Security, all of that business until we get down to their net pay total. Another report that's good to look at would be our payroll liability balances. And we actually had this option to look at our payroll liabilities when I went in to actually pay the liabilities. Let me actually go back here for a second. If I go back here to the home page under pay liabilities, all right, you can run your payroll liabilities report. See that? You can actually run that and take a look at it first before you pay them to make sure that your numbers are correct. So here's my payroll liabilities report. Because I voided that check, I don't have any balances in here, which is pretty sweet, right? That we don't owe any tax, but that's just not reality. So this is where you would see, how much you owe per period. So pretty cool. And then our last report I'm going to show you is the state amount, which is the state taxes. And this is where you can see, let's look at all here. And then you can see for each employee how much they paid for the state of Minnesota, which is where our company, our fake company that we're using is located. So last thing I need to talk about are some of our payroll, our compliance reports for the government, the IRS, and that would be the Form 941, which is your quarterly federal tax return. And that is a summary of the total wages for each quarter, how much tax has been withheld, and then the employer and the employee's Social Security and Medicare tax liabilities. And what's nice is that QuickBooks has a really cool tool in here where you can go in and you can actually run your 941. And that is found actually here. So the last thing I want to show you in this chapter, which got cut off from the previous recording, was how to actually run your compliance reports in QuickBooks and then export them into Excel, which is super awesome. So under reports, under payroll, employees and payroll, we're going to go down to more payroll reports in Excel. And we can use what are called tax form worksheets. And this is great. It actually is going to start Excel here. And we're going to bring in, this has macro enabled fields in here. we're going to enable the content so that we can actually pull in data from QuickBooks. How cool is that? So whether we're doing our quarterly or we're doing the 940, which is our annual federal unemployment return, or we're doing the W-2s, the W-3s, or the state uninsurance wage, the really cool thing is that we can actually bring in data and then we can reconcile it before we actually send it out. Now, if you pay for QuickBooks services, you can actually e-file, which is really awesome. So I'm going to do, let's just do all of our dates here. Let's just pick this here and do create report. So how cool is this? It actually brings up our 941 summary, and you can see that it totals up for our quarter and actually syncs with Excel. So it actually brought in our QuickBooks data into Excel, and then we can use this to reconcile and fill out our form for the IRS. So you can do this with any of the forms that you may need, but a really super cool tool that QuickBooks offers. So in a nutshell, that would be Chapter 9. Again, Chapter 8 was not as dangerous because we didn't actually do payroll, but now with Chapter 9, we're doing payroll. So mistakes are going to happen, but hopefully you can troubleshoot some of those pitfalls by following some of my directions. Thank you.